Hello and welcome to this video on the birch trees, and specifically the silver birch. Birch is a frost-hardy, pot-friendly, aesthetically pleasing tree. It is not a common but still suitable species for bonsai. Birch have certain quirks that may make them extremely unsuitable for beginner or intermediate bonsai enthusiasts. The birch as a family of trees covers nearly 60 different species. They are found more or less across the northern hemisphere and in some of the southern hemispheres. They are a deciduous tree that lose their leaves in autumn. They are characterized in some cases, and particularly in the silver birch, by having a pronounced white bark that peels off and reveals a dark black craggy sort of surface. The bark is initially a brown color and the leaves are triangular shaped and serrated. In the wild, they can grow up to 25 meters in height. They can also get to up to half a meter in diameter. The tree itself is, by its nature, relatively slim. The birch will go from a young tree with golden brown bark to become white. The white bark is initially quite smooth and consistent. Over time, this is worn, and this is when it becomes more rough, and eventually becomes a very dark color, verging on black. Birch is almost elegant in some of the ways it looks. There are two particular varieties, a weeping variety and an upright variety. In either case, you get the same sort of small, thin branches. The color of the bark is useful because it will complement the changing leaf colors. It goes from a light green in spring through to a darker green and then back to yellow in autumn. This is allowing you to create both a nice winter display with that white bark, and then parts of it being extremely dark, or a nice spring through autumn display where you have colourful foliage. When you're planting it out as a bonsai, you should use any good quality potting mix that is free draining. The birch tree is extremely thirsty, but it also can't sit in water. It can be a bit finicky getting this balance just right, and it's made more complicated in winter where the soil must be kept slightly damp. This means that unlike most bonsai where you would barely water them at all, the birch needs a little bit more. As with most bonsai, it needs a good fertilizer every other week and liquid fertilizer on the off week to that. Applying this at a sparing concentration is ideal. Also, since it's a deciduous tree that loses its leaves, you should be mindful, giving it a very low nitrogen fertilizer in the winter, if anything at all, increasing this throughout spring to support the foliage growth, and then tapering that off in autumn. When you're pruning your birch, it's going to be one of these fun trees where you don't want to take off too much. This is for a very simple reason. The wood is relatively soft, and the tree is prone to developing rot. If you make large cuts too frequently, and don't do anything about them, it can lead to rot, which then creates a hollow trunk. This can be great for certain styles, or particularly stylized trees. For this reason, birch is one of the bonsai species that you should be looking to use cutting paste with at all times. Secondary to that is that because of this ability to develop rot very easily, the species can be a bit delicate. When you combine this with the fact that the bark, when you plant the tree in a pot, can take up to 10 years to turn white, you are going to have some trouble getting that kind of impact immediately. You can somewhat streamline this process by planting your tree out in a growing bed for several years beforehand and then transplanting it to a bonsai pot. This will give you more growth quicker and somewhat expedite the process of it turning white, but it's not a fix that's going to be sudden or extreme. When you have your birch and you're looking to wire it, you will need to wire it, particularly if you're looking to create some sort of hanging style. Your cascade and semi-cascade come to mind. The problem with the birch is that the new shoots will always try to grow upwards. This is something you'll see in trees in yards and in parks. New shoots growing upwards. And this means that when you're trying to grow it as a cascade or anything similar, even a broom style, or anything that's going to require a branch going any ways but horizontal or straight up, you're going to have to wire the shoots in the direction you want them to go, This is complicated by the fact that branches that aren't substantial tend to die off when you wire them anyway. This means that even if you think a branch is in an ideal place and you go to wire it, you may cause that branch to die off. This means some of the less regular methods for ensuring branches grow where you want them can be used. Weights, guide wires and similar being ideal, rather than directly wiring the branch of these trees. When we're talking about the life cycle of a bonsai birch, you should consider repotting it, preferably every 2 to 4 years. Remember, they use a lot of nutrition when they put on new growth and new leaves, but you need to be mindful of their root ball. This is a species where you can't take off between 1/3 and 1/2 of the root mass each time. In fact, you need to prune it sparingly. 1/4 or less of the root ball should be removed each time. When you consider that you might get up to 4 years out of each repotting compared to the 2 for some species, you don't need to worry about this as much, but you should compensate with the use of a good fertilizer. You also need to be worried about the soil, and as we mentioned, using any good quality well-draining soil mix will do the job. Another thing to be aware of is that as far as bonsai go, the birch is prone to certain diseases, pests and problems. The biggest problem you are going to face is that with a birch, branches will die off randomly. That is, you may have a main branch in your tree just suddenly up and die one day for no observable or obvious reason. This means your tree may need to be restyled entirely. This is a big reason why the birch is not beginner or intermediate friendly. Birch is also prone to aphids and similar species which can be controlled with insecticides if need be, but you're more likely not to have to worry about that as long as you maintain good garden standards. What is more worrying is birch rust, and you'll need special fungicides for this. It is a specific issue for the birch trees. And as we've mentioned, you have issues with wood rot, particularly when you take large cuts. This means that when you're working with the tree, having a stockpile of lime sulfur or similar on hand along with your cut paste is going to minimize the amount of damage that occurs. Silver birch as a species can make for stunning bonsai. Getting to the stage where they have the appearance where they are that impactful can take a long time, and you're in some respects better off finding specimens you can dig out of the ground, or that have been in the ground for a time. They will have that white bark and look really impressive. Because of many of the issues we've mentioned, they are not suitable for a beginner. Certainly not someone who's very new to the hobby. Someone who's got some skills might manage, but there's also a chance that they may be disheartened or disappointed when branches suddenly die off. They may also not be able to cope with the rot issues. Birch is more suited towards someone who has experience with bonsai, particularly since you can't wire it effectively and cutting can be a problem. Despite that, it can be one of the more amazing trees to look at when done well, but you need to get the experience under your belt before having a go at it. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions or suggestions below.